Right, so this investigation was an investigation that we all knew was coming at some point, but was it ever going to be a surprise that Israel would have problems with it? We knew there would have to be an investigation into exactly what happened on the night of October 7th, especially with so much in the way of evidence pointing to Israel's own involvement on that night, initiating Hannibal Directives as an example to kill their own people rather than let them be taken hostage, the use of tanks and helicopter gunships which targeted people in the kibbutzes and fleeing the Nova Music Festival. Well, now the UN wished to conduct that investigation, and Israel is saying no to them. Something to hide by any chance? Right, so the UN have been attempting to conduct an investigation into the events of October 7th, and you might have been thinking about this already. 6 months have passed after all, and you might have wondered when and if this investigation would ever begin. Whether the ongoing genocide in Gaza was complicating matters, that's what the hold-up was, or just wondering what on earth is genuinely the hold-up here. What is stopping you? The longer this takes to get going, the more time and the more likely Israel are to be covering up any role they may have played in this. Destroying evidence, Damo, you can't possibly be accusing them of that. Well, no, I wouldn't dare, but, well, I know you're thinking it. But as it turns out, an investigation has been attempted, and to possibly nobody but the most ardent of Zionists' surprise, Israel have apparently been blocking them from carrying this investigation out. Literally the very reason they have been committing genocide for 6 months in Gaza, and they don't want the UN to see the evidence for themselves? Well, why could that be? Here's an excerpt from the Reuters piece on this, who appear to have broken this news. It's not being well covered that I've seen, which, given the ramifications of this, is especially shocking, I feel. A UN-mandated commission of inquiry that probes violations of international human rights law on Tuesday accused Israel of obstructing its efforts to collect evidence from the victims of the attack by Hamas in southern Israel on October 7th. So far as the government of Israel is concerned, we have not only seen a lack of cooperation, but active obstruction of our efforts to receive evidence from Israeli witnesses and victims to the evidence that occurred in southern Israel, said Chris Sidoti, one of 3 members of a commission of inquiry into abuses committed in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. We have contact with many, but we would like to have contact with more, Sidoti appealed to the government of Israel, as well as victims and witnesses of the attack, to aid the commission in conducting its probe. In response to Sidoti's comments, the Israeli diplomatic mission in Geneva said it had been carrying out its own investigation into the crimes, and that representatives of the United Nations and other institutions had been to Israel and met with survivors and victims. Victims would never get any justice or the dignified treatment they deserve from the Commission of Inquiry and its members, it said, describing the Commission as having a track record of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel statements. So the long and the short of that is that the UN have mandated an investigation, set up this inquiry, this committee of inquiry. Israel are blocking it, saying they're doing their own investigation because, well, they never lie, do they? Do they expect us to take their word for that? And their justification for blocking the commission is because apparently Israel thinks they are biased and racist towards them. Now the UN are anti-Semitic. The committee of inquiry, anti-Israel sentiment. I do wish Israel really would change the bloody record sometimes. The UN investigators want to speak to the people who were there, those affected, the families of hostages taken, not whoever Israel choose to select and let them speak to, the freed hostages that were held by Hamas and eyewitnesses to the night of the Hamas incursion. Because various media outlets had already conducted interviews themselves with such people, not passable as evidence as far as the UN goes, I'm sure. Their own people need to have these conversations with these people face to face, one on one. But we've heard enough from the media to conclude that this investigation absolutely is needed, is absolutely necessary, especially given what Israel are doing as justification based on it, based on these events, and exactly why Israel are probably running away from it. Stories from eyewitnesses have been key to the truth getting out. Eyewitnesses to the attacks on the music festival that was going on, and in the nearby kibbutzes, which are just agricultural communities, those close to Gaza notably having their own militias for protection, were attacked by Hamas. People were killed, not least Palestinians as well as Israelis who were working in those farms and those fields, as well as those who came into military conflict with each other. It was said that along came the Israeli armed response to deal with Hamas, and well, that was that. The excuse given to Israel to basically go into the occupied territory in the name of self-defense, and everybody and their cat has been saying about Israel's right to self-defense, every politician certainly, and have been committing genocide and ethnic cleansing ever since. But equally, Israel were not absolved of the killing in the kibbutzes either, since more and more evidence appeared that they took part in killing many of their own people in pursuit of Hamas. As far as the Nova Festival was concerned, Israeli newspaper Haaretz came out and said it was an Israeli helicopter that killed its own civilians at that festival. If you're on social media, a viral video did the rounds quite prominently at the time. You may well have seen it. All shot in night vision. It was a very lurid green-coloured clip showing the viewpoint of an Israeli combat helicopter arriving and opening fire on cars and anybody, frankly, running from the scene. 364 people were killed at the Nova Festival, and Israel had been claiming that 260 Israelis were killed there, all by Hamas. But that story eventually changed when some Israelis involved and eyewitnesses made clear that Israeli forces killed some of their own. It has also become clear that the festival was not known to Hamas fighters to be taking place, as it was not their intended target. Yet it was the attack on the festival that instantly grabbed global attention, and was the reason Israel went into Gaza killing indiscriminately as they've done ever since. 1,400 Israelis were killed, was the report by Israel in the immediate aftermath of these attacks. However, the 1,400 dead Israelis figure ended up getting revised down to 1,200 as Israel realised they'd counted 200 Hamas fighters and innocent Palestinians in their count by accident. They just assumed everyone who was dead was Israeli. Well, this overestimate of actual Israelis killed became a matter of ridicule. And when questioned by this, the former UK ambassador to Israel, now an advisor to Netanyahu himself, Mark Regev, a truly reprehensible professional excuse maker, gave away the fact that for 6 weeks Israel didn't know 200 of the bodies they had burned were not Israeli because they believed all the bodies that had been burned had been Israeli. And this is a point that becomes all the more crucial because Hamas were not armed with anything incendiary to burn these people with. It isn't what they were there for. They came to take hostages, not kill people and set them on fire. People burned in cars and in houses, when you come to the matter of those kibbutzes, which I'll come on to in a moment, could not have been burned by Hamas, therefore. In other words, all of those burned had to have been burned by Israel. Regev appeared on camera and certainly seemed to give that away, that they torched some of their own people, and they knew it. As media investigations continued, it seems because of the festival being in their way and screwing up their intended plans, the majority of the people killed in the kibbutzes were not actually killed by Hamas, but were killed by Israel, and this has come from the testimony of a reserve IDF pilot, a Colonel Nof Erez, who spoke to Haaretz about it and said in relation to the kibbutz attacks a Hannibal Directive was ordered. The Hannibal Directives were supposed to be outlawed in Israel in 2016, and these are an Israeli Defense Force order which basically orders the killing of their own people to prevent them being captured, prevent them being taken hostage and being used in hostage exchange deals, because all those Palestinians that Israel hold, they don't want to let them go. What kind of insane authority has such an order in place? But of course, this is why the IDF colonel spoke so candidly to Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper. He was just following orders. And where have we heard that one before? But it also corroborates the eyewitness accounts that have come through as well, saying that it was Israel itself who were responsible for most of the deaths there, with Colonel Eretz saying that the absence of any Israeli forces on the ground at the time ruled out any chance of ground coordination of the air assault, meaning that the helicopters would have been shooting at any target that moved, whether they were Hamas or innocent Israeli citizens who lived there. Many tried to flee the carnage in cars and were cut down by helicopters. It didn't matter if it was Hamas driving away with hostages or innocent Israelis trying to flee the scene. All of them were gunned down according to eyewitnesses who spoke to Haaretz, that Israeli paper. Direct order, a specific directive that should no longer exist, or so we're told. That warrants investigation, doesn't it? The fact Colonel Eretz referred to the strike on Kibbutz Be'eri as mass Hannibal implies it is still Israeli policy to kill their own people to stop them being taken hostage. And according to Eretz, if a hostage situation is detected, it becomes Hannibal. And now Israel are blocking the UN from presumably speaking to the same people who spoke to Haaretz or other media. I wonder if they've been able to speak to Nof Haaretz themselves. And we all get reminded again that anything the Israeli state says about what is happening right now out there and in Gaza is not a narrative that can ever be trusted. They've just put out too much propaganda, too many lies, tried to pass off too many falsehoods as truth, and been caught out too many times doing so. So what is the UN Commission of Inquiry, who are being blocked because they're all anti-Semites apparently, going to do now? This should be a big fat klaxon warning right now. Israel blame Hamas for everything ultimately. So you'd figure if what they were saying was true, that articles like the Haaretz one are false, They ought to be welcoming the UN with open arms to expose Hamas as the vicious perpetrators they are and prove them right and justified in what they've been doing in Gaza for the last 6 months. Yet instead, they are blocking that, actively blocking it, which can only mean they've got something to hide. And when this is the sole basis for everything, absolutely everything they have done in Gaza for 6 months, this has to be the point that world leaders slavishly loyal to Israel realise they have a choice to get taken down with them, or finally do what is right and say enough is enough, this has to end, let the UN in, we need the truth. Defeating Israeli deceit and dishonesty is essential, and I firmly believe the UN investigation, which has got to be allowed to happen, would do that. But the UN needs to show some determination and resolve to get this done too. Equally, Israel is apparently facing total defeat as it insists on apparently planning on taking on Iran again this weekend, which it should be pointed out to is another consequence the world now faces due to what happened on October 7th. And if that is a lie, everything that has happened since is built and based on a lie. Again, reinforcing that need for independent investigation to be carried out. Get all the details on Israel's total defeat, rather than, as Netanyahu often says, total victory, on this video recommendation here, and why Israel is so stuffed. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.